Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Powers in Play, our monthly edition of a program dealing with global issues as they pertain to the Middle East and especially to Israel. And with us today, as almost always, are, from my right, Ambassador Danny Ayalon, a former ambassador to Washington and Deputy Foreign Minister. Danny, welcome.
My pleasure.
Dr. Uzi Arad, formerly the head of the National Security Staff and a policy advisor to the Prime Minister, in addition to heading the intelligence division of Mossad. Dr. Arad.
Hello.
Shalom lecha. And another doctor, another Mossad veteran, Brigadier General Amnon Sofrin, also a former senior officer at the Directorate of Military Intelligence, as well as an intelligence division chief at Mossad. Hi, Amnon.
Hello, Amir.
And finally, the latest doctor in a series, retired Colonel Eran Lerman, formerly with both the Directorate of Military Intelligence and the National Security Staff, where you served as the deputy head. So welcome to all of you. Here we are, having altogether between 150 and 200 years of experience in America watching, but I dare say we have never seen anything like it, nor could we predict what is happening. And leaving aside what President Trump and his administration are doing domestically, this is outside our purview. How do you, Danny, coming from your Washington perch at the embassy, serving alongside President, Secretary of State and Defense, Congress, the Jewish community, how do you explain, as a foreign observer, the Trump phenomenon?
Well, let me take the angle first, of the technical angle, which is always considered by diplomats as the lesser one. They all like to deal with the context, with strategic issues, and matter of protocols are at the bottom of the list. In this case, I think the protocol was probably the failure of this meeting, which led into many, many other ramifications.
What meeting could you elaborate?
Okay, so first of all, I would say, as you know, Amir, before you have a summit like that, you send some advance team to actually...
Danny, please refer to the Trump-Zelensky meeting, if that's the one you mean.
That's what I mean. There was no preparation. And not only there was no preparation, sometimes if the best thing is to get into some mutual understanding, and with a joint statement, this is the max that you can get. If you cannot get that, you leave some points of difference between the two leaders in a closed room, so it doesn't come out. Here, nothing of this was done, no preparation whatsoever, and not only that they didn't leave anything to be discussed behind closed doors. They put everything in the open. 45 minutes of televised meeting like that, which was to deal with the most crucial issues, the fate of Ukraine, nothing else than that.
But Uzi, Danny refers to it as a failure, as if it was done inadvertently, while we know that this particular president has a double background of business and television. And maybe he wanted all of it to be a show, because style is as important as substance for him. And he wanted to show the world or particular audiences the way he is handling Zelensky. Maybe his most important audience was Vladimir Putin. And I'm asking you that because there were times when a certain prime minister you used to work for, Netanyahu, also used the televised minutes, the public minutes of his meetings with presidents, such as Obama, in order to convey a message to his home audience. It was more important for him at that particular moment than what transpired between him and his host.
Yes, but this is not the only dimension in which we've seen in action the unique way that this president of the United States is handling his job. And in so many ways, he's acting out of character. Or let's put it, he's acting out of character, but out of character in terms of what has been traditionally assumed would be the demeanor and the style and the professional side of presidential conduct. We've all been educated on, say, the example of American presidents of the kind that we've seen in the 20th century, and there's never been anything like that. Certainly not in the last 60 years and so forth, which demonstrates one thing, and it is the singular significance of the individual. When you talk about leaders, personalities matter, styles matter, attitudes matter dramatically. And here we have this persona. Now, this persona is very unusual in terms of his background. We've never seen a person with this kind of background getting to the presidency. Usually, he never held any public office.
But you are now referring to number 47. There was the number 45, Trump, the very same person
Yes.
who did not behave like that in his first term.
Well, that's another dynamic, how presidents change in their two terms when there is an interval in between. That has never been a president. But there are so many new things here. But here, still, what you see here is that it is a unique person. His background does dictate some of his conduct. He believes in deals. He thinks he's a good businessman. He did lead many negotiations. He thinks he's a good negotiator. He thinks he's a good media person. And he prizes himself on that. And he takes the liberties of doing business and even the policies which reflect that those methods. They are very surprising. Sometimes they are very unsettling. They can cause difficulties. But I'll tell you that in a more limited way, odd characters rising into prominence happen in other countries. Look at Boris Johnson. You know, all the leaders in the world today are slightly erratic, have their own individual quirks, and instead of being all cast of the same mold, they are all very unique.
And they have to interact.
But Trump is something else because of his unique kind of personality. And on top of that, it does reflect a change in American political culture. So it's a combination of his politics, his choice, his political appeal, which is very fluid and reflects new conditions in America, which are ideological, social, and political, and his unique personality.
Amnon, because you are a veteran of both military intelligence and Mossad, the question has to do with who is in charge of observing, analyzing, and perhaps even recommending issues regarding to the United States in the Israeli government. Usually in other countries, the Foreign Office or the Department of State are leading, perhaps the Central Intelligence Agency. But here in Israel, military intelligence has the lead, and of course Mossad too, over the last 50 years, has a robust intelligence staff. So if the Israeli government wants to analyze what President Trump is doing and is about to do, presumably what you see is what you get, but you have to analyze it. Who's in charge?
Everybody and nobody. That's a good answer.
Precisely that.
And I'll tell you exactly why. First of all, even at the military intelligence and at the Mossad as well, people will analyze what Trump says and how he behaves and his personality traits and so on and so on and so on. When you come to the prime minister, just like the one we have right now, Netanyahu, and his senior advisor, Lerman, who are both...
Another former ambassador
right,
to Washington.
Both of them raised were raised in the United States, and of course, Mr. Dermer thinks that he knows Americans best than anyone else, and nobody can compete him.
Except Netanyahu.
Sure, of course, the supreme leader. Just to remind us, not in North Korea, in Israel. But
He meant chief executive.
No.
But he translated
No.
That's an internal Israeli.
He defined it exactly the supreme leader.
Okay,
Just like
Yes.
Kim Jong-un.
he, you mean Dermer?
No, not him.
Bibi.
He
Mr.
too.
Barkat. Mr. Barkat.
No, but Dermer too.
Yeah, okay. Now, the fact is that both of them think that they know the Americans better than us. And when just yesterday or the day before, when there was a discussion in the cabinet room, and the head of the Internal Security Agency, Ronen Bar, said something about we can go on fighting because we have the backwind coming out from Washington, D.C., Dermer began to shout at him, "You don't understand the Americans. You don't understand what American policy is.
And leave the United States to the prime
With
minister.
the prime minister, and you'll deal only with operational side."
But there is something to it, because in addition to what everybody knows and the diplomatic cables, there is also that private part of the meetings in Washington at the White House, where the prime minister sits with the president and only he knows
Exactly.
what took place, and perhaps he shares it with others, such as Dermer. Perhaps he doesn't want, and then he bears the responsibility for failures of assessment.
Totally right. But he probably shares it only with Dermer, and the others don't know anything about it. What was discussed within these two persons in the closed room, nobody knows, especially all the people that surround him.
So how
Right.
can he expect, how can the leading decision maker, even though we have a system of government where a group, the government, and within the government, the cabinet, they are in charge of making the decisions, and they should bear the responsibility too. But if there is only one person or only two who know the inner secrets, how can they expect the agencies in charge of analysis to come up with a reasonable one?
I'll tell you about it, a small joke that was told to me by my former commander, General Eran Biran, was the commanding general of the Central Command when I was an intelligence officer. He says as follows: Napoleon is at the battlefield looking at the troops, asking the intelligence officer, "Tell me about the enemy situation." He says, "The enemy is ready, is prepared to fight. His willingness is extra." And he asks the operations officer, "What about our troops?" "Exhausted, they don't feel like fighting," and so on. He looks at both of them and say, "Attack!" And they look at him and say, "How do you say that? What about myself? I'm the leader, right?"
Okay.
That's his answer.
Command decision. So Eran, going from style to content, what can foreign leaders, especially, of course, those involved, like the European ones, but also others who try to partake from what happened between Trump and Zelensky, when they try to infer from it what is going to happen in their region of the world? What should they understand?
Well, first of all, it's not easy to infer from anything. Somebody recently told me, "I wish we still lived in precedented times." This is totally unprecedented. Some of the basic tools through which we used to understand American affairs, and I can remember Israeli prime ministers who did listen to their intelligence officers.
Some of them.
Some of them. This is not a nostalgic session here.
No.
But even the Constitution, aspects of the Constitution that we thought were rock solid under, let's say, reassessment. One of the saddest funny caricatures I saw in recent weeks, front page of the New Yorker, well, of course, no friends of Trump, was the founding fathers leaving their offices, each with his a cardboard box and his personal belongings.
You are fired.
Yeah, they're all fired. Madison and Jefferson and Franklin, whoever. The Constitution is under challenge. Some of the things that the Musk administration is doing have no legal sanction, and so on and so forth.
When you're analyzing what the executive branch would do, you cannot consider the usual limits, checks, and balances. Because it's an unknown terrain.
I recall a situation where President Reagan, for reasons, he was a great friend of Israel, but he did cut aid to Israel at one point, and Congress put it back at the 1.5 level that we were used to. That's at the time. This is no longer the situation. The Republican Party, which has control of both houses, is almost entirely in awe and more or less subservience to the analytical tools of how Washington works are hardly relevant.
So Danny, what are the implications of Ukraine to Gaza?
Yeah, so just before that, just to continue what Eran said, my experience in Washington is never bet against the president. Even though, he may have a confrontational Congress, the president always wins. You mentioned the Reagan.
Not the House always wins.
Not the House, no. Reagan overcame Congress on the issue of AWACS, that
to Saudi Arabia.
Wanted. Yeah, to Saudi Arabia. Secondly, even Barack Obama, had his way against Congress. About Ukraine and Gaza, there is some tend to attach a lot of sophistication to the American system. I'm not sure this was the case. I don't think this was a planned ambush by J.D. Vance and the president. However, there are some maybe unintended consequences, and the consequences is don't mess with this president because he can go berserk and he can go all the way to crush you. This is what he did with Zelensky, at least in public appearance. And I think the implication to Gaza is that either, I'm not talking about Hamas, but the negotiators, whether it's Qatar, whether it's Egypt on the one side, whether it's Bibi Netanyahu on the other side, I think they should show much more respect. J.D. Vance told Zelensky, show respect. I think much more respect should be shown.
Aretha Franklin.
Exactly. So I think that there is even more leverage and more weight to what the American administration would like to see coming out of Gaza, whether continuation of the ceasefire, whether the end of this phase one or even going to phase two, more deterrence for the president.
Uzi, in the follow-up or in the fall from the grace of the Zelensky-Trump meeting, major American figures said, okay, if the Ukraine wants to be back in our good graces, it should sacrifice its leader. Without Zelensky, we can recover our relations. And Zelensky said, for an acceptance into NATO, I'm willing to resign because then my mission would have been fulfilled. Can there be, and of course it's ironic because the Trump administration and school of thought is against the neoconservatives who were for regime change in Iraq or Iran, but apparently they are for regime change in Kiev. Can there be such a demand to Middle Eastern countries, including Israel? Change your leader and we will be on better terms.
Well, this is one of the new facets of present-day politics, in which you're seeing not only sometimes putting in place a direct policy of regime change, either at your allies because you say, I cannot work with this guy, or in some other way, you want to remove somebody. But today, you see much greater intervention in the political processes of countries. Each one is meddling, and it is done among allies. And this new way of managing international affairs is very, very confusing. Have Americans been interfering in Israeli elections in the past? Well, yes. But now they can do it through all kinds of new means.
But usually for the incumbent. They didn't really help the opposition. They were for stability and for the incumbent, mostly.
True, that might have been a good
Not in
judicious
92.
advice of the kind of Danny mentioned. Danny had said that his rule was do not, gamble on taking action against the incumbent American president. Well, look who did in the Israeli case. It was Ron Dermer who advised Netanyahu throughout the Obama administration to go on a confrontational line.
In 2015, in Congress.
Not only was he supportive of the Republican, but he was extremely aggressive in his handling of and advising this man,
He
who
assumed Romney
presumably
would win.
is the expert on the American political scene, advised the Israeli prime minister to go on a battle and to engage in a kind of a Zelensky confrontation with Obama, at one point lecturing to the president, in which Obama was a little bit taken aback.
And then the photo remains of
Yes.
him pointing his finger.
Yes. So, and he was advising him to do that, and he was advising him against your rule. We have a capacity in Congress to overrule the president. So that puts a question. One thing: how expert is really in American politics, Ron Dermer? Because even American politics are more complicated, and the rule is
But
difficult.
perhaps you wanted to comment, and please do. Perhaps it's a matter of a bias, political, ideological. We now have an ideologically motivated ambassador in Washington,
But I want to
and
draw one
Mr. Mr. Leiter. But Eran first.
No, ideology matters. I mean, paradoxically, Trump tries to come across as a deal maker, as a hard-nosed transactional realist. But what we actually see at work is a reclassification of the world in his mind, and that's a warning to global leaders, according to categories of ideological orientation. And basically, that does go back to Trump 45. His speech at the UN at the time divided the world between universalists, Europe, and you can imagine even the misogynist undercurrent in this description, and patriots. And it so happens that the present Israeli leadership, for all its faults in his own eyes, it belongs to his side of European politics. And that's the message J.D. Vance delivered in Munich, which drove a man we know, Christoph Heusgen, to tears, literally. He was crying on the podium because that was a breach of what made for the alliance since 1949.
Amnon, do you have, or did you used to have, now you're no longer with Mossad, the sort of profilers made popular by Dr. Post of the CIA before Camp David, for instance, recommending to President Carter not to meet jointly with Begin and Sadat, but rather separately because of the different characters which could cause an explosion. Do you have, or did you have, an expert, for instance, who could analyze Donald Trump?
Specifically Donald Trump, no, because it was not valid at that time. But we did have people that could profile people and give recommendations when you meet somebody, how to approach to him, how to discuss with him, and so on.
Was it validated later by reality? When the prime minister of the time came back from a meeting with a leader, did he tell the experts, yes, you were right, this is how we responded, or your analysis was wrong. In person, he is different.
It depends on the prime minister. Not everybody used to do that, but some of them did.
I want to add something.
Please do.
It's an anecdote, but we did engage with Dr. Post when he was head of the psychological division. And it was a process of, he was writing profiles of leaders as he should. And I remember running into him around the election of President Carter on the American side, and Mr. Begin shortly afterward on the Israeli side. Turned out both of us were having to do profiles of the other guy. So in the good spirit of collaboration, I proposed to Post, listen, I'll write for you the profile on Begin, you write for me the profile on Carter, and we exchange that. But to tell you, the methods are the same, and the reason for that, it was because both leaders at the time were new. Begin was a completely new surprise as a prime minister, but Jimmy Carter was not known, so we didn't have much to fall on. So we did need to have background, personal background, political background. So such an exchange was really handy.
But did Begin make use of your Carter profile?
Very much. And that's because of another thing. Leaders think in terms of personal terms. I once changed the title of an intelligence paper from the following title, Egypt's National Security Strategy. I changed the title and said, Egypt Mubarak's Strategy. That got the attention of the prime minister because they're interested in the individual behind.
Right. Since we're talking episodes, I will add one.
Yeah. Hold on. Yeah, go ahead.
We had also a psychologist working with us at the Directorate of Military Intelligence in my day. And at one point, we referred to him as a case of the contender to the leadership in Yeltsin's Russia, Zhirinovsky. I've never seen a man coming back happier. Finally, a clinical case.
But they all are. They all are clinical.
I have to say, Assad was a very dry, calculated butcher.
Who?
Yeah, Assad. He was sane
But
as a sane can be.
When Bibi got interested in negotiating with the Syrians, with Assad, the elder Assad, when somebody wrote him the following phrase, he's an old man in a hurry. Okay?
And indeed, he died shortly thereafter.
But he was in a hurry.
Danny, we have talked about the president, and obviously he is the key figure. But one level below him, there are cabinet secretaries. There is also the National Security Council, the advisor, and other people who report directly or almost directly to the president, Director of National Intelligence, Director of CIA. Is it important now? Because it seems as if it's a one-man show.
It seems so. And indeed, if you have to characterize in one word...
Two-man show.
Or one word, Trump, I would say he's a bully with everything which is engaged. Also, he is leaning on very, very strong ideology of not the neoconservatives, but of the what used to be the Tea Party group of the Republicans. But yes, I think although they are in minor positions, all of them, but there are still some who are, I would say, closer to him or where he would listen more than others. One, just to start from the ones who are maybe least relevant, I would say Rubio, which is the Secretary of State. At this point, he does not really listen to him, and actually over his head, he reorganizes the State Department, the USAID, and other things. J.D. Vance, which I thought was just maybe a not so important, after the meeting with Zelensky, it seems like he was a major figure over there, and Trump brought him in purpose, and I think now his influence will even go further. And we know he's an isolationist by heart, so this also can make a lot of...
But there was an event prior to that which maybe energized Vance to do it. When Trump was asked whether Vance would be his heir apparent, whether he is the leading candidate for the nomination, in 2028. So first of all, we know that Trump himself may consider running, in spite of the Constitution. Right now, the amendment prohibiting that.
So,
But perhaps he wanted to make an impression.
Maybe, yes. So if we can continue with the gallery in terms of, let's say, importance, so I would say Secretary of Defense Hegseth and even the National Security Advisor Welch are also, I would say, they are in between. They are not very influential, but they are more than Rubio. I believe, beside J.D. Vance, which went up to prominence, there is another figure which is not up front, which is the Chief of Staff, the lady, Mrs. Welch from Texas.
Susie Welch.
Right. And I think she is a major figure, almost
in foreign affairs,
almost like in every affairs, almost like a mother figure to him. He relies on her on everything. She ran his campaign, which was very successful. So I think she is someone that if I were to advise our people, whether it's in the Mossad or State Department or our foreign ministry, is to pay attention to her.
But Eran, usually cabinet secretaries have another constituency, and that is in Congress. Each of the secretaries must report frequently, come to a hearing.
Right.
And now, you mentioned earlier that the Republican Party controls both houses as well as the White House, and perhaps the leaders in Congress, especially with the slim majority in the House, they don't have so much power. So is it important for other countries to try and influence the relevant committees and key members or senators, or is it futile, useless?
Let me recall something from the Trump 45 era, when he wanted to pull out the American troops in Syria.
2018.
In 2018, under the influence of his chummy relationship with Erdogan. It was a key group of veteran Republican senators, specifically I would mention Lindsey Graham, who basically walked him back. At the time, he was very much dependent in his political situation on their support. He was under impeachment and again impeachment, and so it was very important for them. They were important enough for him to have an influence on his decisions, specifically on this particular case. I'm not quite sure whether they can hold their ground now. This group of veteran Republicans who are committed to the old world order, the NATO system, I don't think they are happy with what they're seeing now, with the breach with Europe.
But they are afraid to break with Trump.
But they are, to some extent, they need to walk very carefully the ground, because he is at any moment liable to declare them as rhinos, Republicans in name only, and break their base under their feet. And so it's an extremely complex situation. Still, I think there is some bipartisan base in Congress for the old world order which Trump is trying to break. And this is going to come to a head sooner or later.
Amnon, President Trump always says, and apparently sincerely believes, that he is a great friend of Israel, and that there is the unbreakable bond between the countries, probably one of the few issues on which there is continuity between various administrations throughout the year. On the other hand, he also wants to save money. And the Elon Musk campaign to cut federal expenditure is a major line of effort.
Right.
In 2028, the current memorandum of understanding signed by President Obama 9 years ago,
26,
giving Israel $38 billion over 10 years. There are additional funds, so approximately 4.5 billion a year. Could this change with President Trump telling Israel, you are still going to get all the access to technology and our diplomatic support, of course, but you have to pay your way?
It depends on how things are going to look for the coming years. He wants to cut off all the wars, the big wars in the world, not only in the Middle East. He's now going to make some deal, probably, with President Putin to end the war in Ukraine. But Ukraine will have to give up all the eastern part that was captured by the Russians since 2022. And to settle up with what was left. We will ensure that nobody will try to invade and to attack you one more time, but you will leave that to the Russians, and we'll give you in return something else.
He already said that once the Americans invest in rare earth, the minerals, and there are Americans there, they will be the sort of a tripwire that the Berlin Brigade was in the Cold War, and the Russians will not dare invade.
Attack Ukraine while the Americans are there. Right. This is part of the deal. Second, he wants to end up the war in the Middle East. He wants to take everybody out of the Middle East, all his soldiers, to bring them back home, as well as from Europe. And the Europeans are terrified from that. They understand that they're left alone, and they cannot rely anymore on the United States as what we call the major component in defending Europe. And they now begin to speak about independence of Europe without the United States. That means that his aim is very clear. Now, I believe that in the end of the day, it will arrive to Israel as well. It will reduce the expenses that are being brought to Israel, access to technology, of course, but nevertheless, you will have to build up yourself. And since you are going to stop the war, you don't need so much military assistance coming out from us.
Uzi, a question regarding national character.
But just, I want to add something to this.
Please.
In the first place, yes, I agree. I think that at one point, the Trump approach to assistance to Israel and cooperation with Israel will be dictated by the value that he sees coming through this from him. To the extent that Israel would indeed, in terms of capacity and action, be seen as helping the American role and contributing either to American economic interests or even security and regional interest, they would see as an investment in Israel. So much of it depends on us. But it is clear that we have to cultivate this relationship, and we have to understand that our dependence on America is very high. And I suggest that as we certainly have to observe the need for respect, and I think that if the word bully, a character may offend Trump, we could replace that by referring him as the brutalist, which is a characterization which is more acceptable, certainly by us Jews.
Especially by Adrian Brody winning the Oscar earlier this week.
So I think brutalist looks like more fitting. And
New architecture.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, but you used up your time, so I'll deflect the question to Danny. Regarding national character, the Chinese and the Arabs are known for playing the long game. They can wait years, decades, maybe centuries. The Israelis are more short-tempered. Can we simply wait out Trump?
Oh, I think so. I think Israel has enough reserves in terms of its national assets to certainly wait out. But in your question to both Amnon and Uzi, I think that the value of Israel to Trump is very, very apparent, especially as he wants to bring back the boys home, the American. And then he can tell all the other allies of America, I live here, but you have a safety net in Israel. and he's going to continue and invest in Israel.
Iran.
The elephant in the room, the Iranian question. By the time, I think it's not 28. I think it's coming. It's
More than
26, yeah.
It's probably 23. By then, the question of action against the Iranian nuclear project and perhaps the destabilization of the Iranian regime are going to be the key to analysis about the future of the region. If the United States helps not only Israel, but others in the region go through this existential crisis successfully, then all calculations are going to change. I agree completely with Boss Danny. But all that was said here really, that we need to reconfigure our own security base.
We will, but not today. And therefore, I want to
Tomorrow.
Maybe, yes, or next week, Colonel Dr. Eran Lerman, Brigadier General Dr. Amnon Sofrin, just Dr. Uzi Arad, because your civilian titles are not military.
And no doctor.
And no doctor, Frau Dr. Danny Ayalon, Ambassador. This has been Powers in Play for the month of March. We will be back with another edition quite soon as the weeks go by. For the time being, Shalom from Jerusalem.